Imagine entering an ashram, nestled in the lush hills of southern India in the early 20th century. You sit cross-legged before a sage who has devoted decades to inner exploration and direct experience of consciousness. When you ask, "Is physical reality real?" he responds with serene certainty, "No, this is Maya, a dream appearing as reality. What seems solid is merely consciousness manifesting in form." Now transport yourself to a cutting-edge quantum physics laboratory, surrounded by sophisticated equipment and mathematical equations. You pose the same question to a scientist at the frontier of theoretical physics. "Is physical reality real?" They reply, "While it appears substantial, at the quantum level, there is no matter as we conventionally understand it. Reality is more like information and probability waves than solid objects." These two individuals, separated by culture, time, methodology, and worldview, arrive at strikingly similar conclusions. The sage through meditation, and the physicist through empirical investigation, both point to an extraordinary insight. Physical reality is not what it appears to be. This convergence is no coincidence. It reveals what philosophers call the perennial understanding, a core truth rediscovered throughout human history. Like perennial flowers that return season after season, this wisdom resurfaces across diverse cultures, traditions, and eras, forming the golden thread that weaves through the world's spiritual teachings. This book explores the perennial understanding, not as an abstract philosophical concept, but as a practical pathway to healing the mind. By recognizing the profound connections between ancient wisdom and modern science, we open ourselves to transformative insights that can liberate us from suffering and awaken us to our deeper nature. Throughout history, mystics and sages across traditions have pointed to a profound insight at the heart of the perennial understanding. Reality is inherently unified rather than fragmented. The ancient Vedic Upanishads expresses this truth in verse 7. It is unseen, beyond empirical dealings, beyond the grasp, beyond inference, indescribable, unthinkable, and inexpressible. It is the essence of the self, the cessation of phenomena. It is peace. It is bliss. It is non-dual. This is the self, and this is to be realized. This passage describes what the ancient rishis discovered through deep meditation, that beneath the apparent diversity of the world lies a single, indivisible reality they call the self. This self isn't something we can perceive with our senses or fully grasp with our intellect, yet it forms the foundation of everything we experience. When realized, it brings profound peace because it dissolves the illusion of separation that causes our suffering. What's remarkable is how modern quantum physics has independently arrived at complementary conclusions. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, after devoting his life to the rigorous study of matter, declared, "There is no matter as such." Similarly, Einstein observed, "Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one." What physicists call non-locality, and what the sage terms oneness, are essentially two perspectives describing the same essential insight. The separations we perceive are not ultimately real. What we experience as reality is an intricate dance of energy and consciousness, an interconnected whole that transcends our conventional notions of individuality and separation. Reality itself is not a collection of separate objects, but a unified field where apparent separation exists only as surface appearance. Liberation arises not from rejecting these appearances, but from seeing through them to the underlying unity they temporarily conceal. At the core of human suffering lies what spiritual traditions have consistently identified as a misperception, the belief in separation. A Course in Miracles states it directly. Healing is the process of undoing the belief in separation. Suffering emerges when we perceive ourselves as separate from others, from life itself, and from our source. This illusion generates fear, conflict, and an endless search for fulfillment through external circumstances that can never provide lasting peace. This pattern of separation is illustrated in the story of Adam and Eve. When they ate from the tree of knowledge, they weren't merely breaking a rule. They were accepting the serpent's deception that they were separate from God and lacking something essential. Before this moment, they existed in perfect union with the divine, experiencing the wholeness of being. The serpent convinced Eve she was incomplete, that what she lacked, the fruit could provide. And in that moment of doubt, the first perception of separation was born. The fruit didn't create separation. It merely symbolized their acceptance of the belief in separation. When they covered themselves afterward, they were physically manifesting their new perception of separateness. This act of covering revealed how separation led immediately to judgment. Suddenly, they saw their bodies as shameful, as something to hide. This shame emerged not from their nakedness, which had always been their natural state, but from their new perception of themselves as separate, vulnerable beings who could be judged. They were hiding from what they already were, whole and complete. Their expulsion from Eden wasn't punishment, but the natural consequence of their shifted perception. How can one remain in paradise while believing oneself to be outside of it? Jesus' words in Matthew 16:24, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me," offer a profound invitation. This denial of self isn't about self-rejection, but about surrendering the separate self that conceals our true nature. Taking up one's cross represents the willingness to die to this illusory separate self, so that our authentic identity might be revealed. Through this spiritual death of the ego, we discover the infinite life of our true being. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of all suffering. We can only become attached to something when we believe we're separate from it in the first place. When we perceive ourselves as separate beings, we inevitably grasp at external things to fill what feels like an inner void. This cycle of attachment deepens our sense of separation, reinforcing the very illusion we're trying to escape. This pattern captures the essence of all human suffering, the acceptance of an illusion as reality, and the rejection of reality as illusion. Liberation comes through reversing this confusion, recognizing oneness as the core reality of existence. and seeing separation for the illusion it is. In this light, healing transforms from an attempt to repair defects into a remembrance, a clear recognition of the unchanging wholeness that has always been our true nature. Everything that exists is an expression of this same oneness. Just as waves rise and fall on the ocean's surface, all forms emerge from and return to the same infinite source. The diversity we perceive, the countless forms, colors, and textures of existence, is simply oneness appearing in a myriad of ways. To know this is to recognize that you, too, are an expression of that same oneness. Some call it God, Source, or the Infinite, but these are merely names pointing to the same reality. Consider a wave rising from an ocean. The wave appears distinct and separate, yet remains inseparable from the ocean itself. This metaphor illuminates our relationship with the divine source. While we appear as individual expressions, we are never truly separate from the infinite ocean of consciousness that creates and sustains us. Just as the wave cannot exist apart from the ocean, we cannot be separated from our source. Adam and Eve believed that they could be waves distinct from the ocean, selves separate from the source. Their story is our story. We continue to eat from the tree of knowledge of separation daily, believing ourselves to be alone, insufficient, and disconnected from the wholeness of our being. Each time we feel we're not enough, each time we grasp at external things to complete us, we reenact their ancient decision. This understanding resolves the apparent paradox of how we can be one with the infinite while maintaining our unique expression. We are neither completely separate nor exclusively the whole. We are eternal expressions of the one infinite source, each carrying its essence while playing our own unique role in creation. When we recognize reality as oneness, we discover what Jesus called the peace of God, which passeth all understanding. This peace exists beyond the mind's ability to comprehend it. While ordinary happiness always has a cause, a reason why we feel good, the peace of God is causeless, existing prior to thought itself, at the very ground of your being. You cannot understand this peace through thinking, because it is what remains when thinking subsides. This is the peace that Adam and Eve knew before their perception shifted. A peace not based on anything external, but inherent in their very being. They walked in perfect harmony with creation because they had not yet convinced themselves they were separate from it. Their fall wasn't from a physical plane, but from a state of awareness, from the recognition of their true nature as expressions of the divine. In the ancient Upanishad, it states, "He who knows the self knows peace eternal. He sees all beings in the self, and the self in all beings." This points to something remarkable. True peace has nothing to do with changing our circumstances. Instead, it comes from recognizing our real nature. When we see who we truly are, we recognize this same self expressing itself as everything and everyone. Like waves aren't separate from the ocean, All beings are expressions of this one self. This peace is permanent because it is not founded on changing circumstances, but on unchanging truth. Jesus further illuminated this understanding in Matthew 7:21, when he said, "Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father, which is in heaven." The kingdom of heaven Jesus refers to is not a place we go after death, but a state of inner peace, free from suffering, that's available here and now. Similarly, the Father is Jesus' term for existence itself, the oneness, the infinite intelligence of life. His words reveal that genuine happiness comes not from what we profess with our words, but from how we align our actions with the will of this oneness. This alignment can be understood through the metaphor of a cell in the body. A cell doesn't thrive by acting solely for its own benefit, but by functioning in harmony with the entire organism. Similarly, our deepest fulfillment comes when we align with the greater whole, rather than pursuing only separate interests. What Jesus called doing the will of my Father is essentially living in conscious harmony with the one existence, the universal intelligence that flows through all things. As Nisargadatta Maharaj says in I Am That, liberation is never of the person, it is always from the person. This reveals a profound insight. Peace isn't something the person attains or develops. Peace is what remains when the illusion of being a separate person dissolves. It's like a wave trying to find happiness, when happiness belongs to the ocean itself. The wave can never find lasting happiness as long as it mistakes itself for just a wave. Its peace comes only from recognizing its true nature as the ocean. This understanding is crucial because it reveals why our usual attempts to find peace fail. As long as we believe ourselves to be a person seeking peace, we remain caught in the very illusion that blocks peace. When we think of ourselves as separate persons, we naturally seek peace through changing circumstances. The mind constantly chases conditional happiness, believing, I'll be happy when this problem is solved, or I'll find peace once this situation changes. Yet any peace dependent on circumstances is inherently temporary. When one desire is fulfilled or problem solved, another invariably takes its place. True peace lies deeper than these transient forms and appearances. The peace that emerges from recognizing our true nature differs markedly from what we typically understand as happiness. Happiness as we commonly experience it depends on external circumstances, conditions, achievements, relationships, possessions, or even health. It rises and falls with changing circumstances, making it inherently unstable. The peace of God, by contrast, exists independent from conditions. It doesn't arrive when something happens. It is revealed when the distortions in perceptions that block it are removed. This reveals an important distinction. We don't need to create peace. We need only to recognize it. Peace isn't something to be achieved, but something to be uncovered. It's not a distant goal, but our natural state, the reality that remains when our misperceptions dissolve. In this sense, Spiritual practices don't produce peace, but rather remove the obstacles to experiencing the peace that has always been present. Consider the difference between a room that is dark because the light hasn't been turned on, and a room that is dark because the windows are covered. In the first case, we need to create light by flipping a switch. In the second, we need only remove what blocks the light that's already present. Our experience of separation is like the covered windows, not an absence of peace, but a barrier to the peace that has never left. This understanding transforms our approach to healing. Rather than seeking to add peace to our experience, we focus on removing the distortions that block peace. Each belief in separation, each perception of lack, each moment of resistance to what is, these are the coverings that seem to hide our inherent wholeness. As we gently release these misperceptions, we naturally return to the peace that is our birthright, the same peace that existed in Eden before the serpent's whisper of separation was believed. If this peace is our true nature, why do we experience ourselves as separate, limited beings seeking happiness? The illusion of separation is not a mistake, but a deliberate creation. Just as the ocean may manifest waves to experience itself in different forms, consciousness manifests duality to experience itself through the interplay of contrast. Light and shadow, self and other, form and formlessness. This play of duality creates the rich tapestry of life experience, offering opportunities for growth, discovery, and remembrance. As Robert Schwartz writes in Your Soul's Gift, incarnation does not literally remove us from our eternal home. Rather, it limits our capacity to see the non-physical parts of it. This veiling of our true nature creates the sense of individuality, the feeling of being a separate self navigating a fragmented world. Yet even amidst this apparent separation, we remain inseparably connected to the infinite source, like waves never truly separate from the ocean. The journey of life, then, is not about becoming whole, but about rediscovering the wholeness that has never been lost. Consider the analogy of an author and their story. The author creates a narrative filled with characters, each with distinct journeys and struggles. Immersed in the story, the author identifies with one of the characters, experiencing its joys and sorrows as if they were their own. Yet the author is never truly limited by the character's perspective. When the author remembers their true nature, they recognize they are not merely a participant in the story, but the creator of the entire narrative. The character's struggles don't disappear, but they are now seen from a vastly different perspective. This process of forgetting and remembering serves a purpose in the evolution of consciousness. Through temporarily forgetting our true nature, we gain the opportunity to remember it anew, to recognize it not as an inherited concept, but as a living truth discovered through our own experience. This cycle creates a depth of knowing that would be impossible without the contrast provided by apparent separation. The spiritual journey is not about escaping the human experience, but about embracing it fully while simultaneously recognizing its nature as a temporary expression of the infinite. This dual awareness, being both the wave and knowing oneself as the ocean, allows us to participate in life's unfolding with greater freedom, joy, and compassion. Like a skilled magician's trick that persists even after we know its secret, the appearance of separation can feel overwhelmingly real, even when we intellectually grasp its illusory nature. In the next chapter, we'll examine the precise structure of this illusion, how it forms, sustains itself, and influences our perception, so we can more effectively dissolve its hold on our consciousness. Believing separation is real creates cascading effects on how we perceive ourselves and the world. When we accept the illusion of separation as truth, several predictable symptoms emerge. The first symptom is the belief in our separateness. We come to identify with a false self, a persona, or ego that feels distinct and isolated from everything else. This mask, derived from the Latin word for an actor's face covering, becomes what we mistake for our true identity. The second symptom naturally follows. Since we believe we are separate, we inevitably feel incomplete. This manifests as a persistent sense of lack, the nagging feeling that something essential is missing. We experience this as insecurity, self-doubt, and the reoccurring thought, I am not enough. This perception of lack isn't reflecting reality, but rather stems from the initial misperception of separation. The third symptom builds upon the previous two, believing that our sense of lack can be fulfilled by something outside of us. We become convinced that peace, happiness, or wholeness can be achieved through external circumstances, relationships, possessions, or achievements. The voice of separation whispers, if I could just have this, do that, or be with them, I would finally feel complete. The fourth symptom completes the cycle of suffering. We go in search of external fulfillment, looking outside of ourselves for something that can never truly satisfy us. This pursuit inevitably leads to disappointment, as nothing external can heal the illusory wound of separation. Even when we attain what we thought would bring fulfillment, the satisfaction is temporary, and the cycle begins again. This pattern persists until we recognize it for what it is, a series of misperceptions, rather than ultimate truth. The path back to freedom begins with awareness, recognizing these symptoms as signposts, pointing back to our original misunderstanding about the nature of reality. Healing unfolds through three interconnected dimensions that directly addresses the symptoms of separation. Each dimension builds upon the others, creating a holistic process of realignment with truth. As we shift our perception from the ego's misperceptions to the deeper reality of oneness, the cycle of suffering begins to dissolve. The first step in healing is aligning your thoughts with the reality of oneness. The symptom of believing in separation creates distorted perceptions that shape how you interpret and experience the world. To realign your thoughts, you must first become aware of these patterns and question their validity. Recognizing that separation is an illusion allows you to see yourself as inherently whole and complete, rather than lacking. This shift is not about adopting new beliefs, but about letting go of false perceptions that no longer serve you. Through mindfulness and self-inquiry, you gradually reclaim your awareness of truth, allowing your thoughts to reflect a more accurate perception of reality. One where you are not separate and therefore not lacking. As your thoughts align with truth, your emotional state naturally follows. Emotions reflect your inner thought system, signaling whether your perceptions are aligned with reality or distorted by the belief in separation. When you believe you are separate and lacking, emotions like fear, anger, and sadness arise as indicators of this misperception. However, when your thoughts reflect the truth of your inherent completeness, these negative emotions appear less frequently and with less intensity. Rather than being sources of suffering, they become valuable guides, reminders to reassess your perception and return to clarity. Positive emotions naturally arise when you perceive life through the lens of wholeness rather than lack. This emotional shift reinforces the healing process, creating a sense of inner stability that doesn't depend on external fulfillment. The final dimension of healing is demonstrated in understanding. When your thoughts and emotions align with truth, your actions naturally embody this new awareness. Life becomes less about searching outside yourself for fulfillment and more about expressing the completeness that you already are. You no longer feel compelled to seek external solutions to an internal sense of lack, because you recognize that your peace and fulfillment arise from within. This understanding allows you to approach life with a greater trust and presence, knowing that what you've been seeking through external means has always been available within you. Your actions become expressions of wholeness, rather than desperate attempts to fill a perceived void. As we recognize the symptoms of separation, believing we are separate, feeling a sense of lack, seeking external fulfillment, and searching outside ourselves for what can never be found there, we begin to see clearly how they create suffering in our lives. Having explored the theoretical foundation of the perennial understanding and examined how misperceptions create suffering, the question naturally arises: how do we apply these insights practically in our daily lives? How do we move from intellectual understanding to lived experience? For me, A Course in Miracles provided the bridge between theory and practice. It's a book that came out in the 70s, channeled by Helen Schucman and typed by Bill Thetford. Bill was a professor and director of the psychology department at Columbia's University College of Physicians and Surgeons, and Helen was a research psychologist and associate professor of medical psychology at the same institution. Helen started hearing a voice one day and began taking notes on what it said. She called it an inner dictation. Because they were quite prominent in their fields, mentioning anything about hearing voices that was providing a spiritual text would have been considered very unusual at the time and potentially threatening to their careers. So they kept it quiet for 7 years as they created the book together, eventually publishing it with no author listed. I had heard a few mentions of this book during dialogues with spiritual teachers like Rupert Spira and Eckhart Tolle, and they always spoke highly of it. So when I was in a thrift store one day and saw the title, I thought, that's the book I've heard about. As I picked it up and flipped through the pages, none of it made sense. But since it was only a few dollars and quite expensive online, I brought it home. It wasn't until a few years later I would eventually pick it up again, catalyzed by discovering people who were teachers of this material. They helped decipher its language, which was quite dense and used words unconventionally. People like Marianne Williamson, Robert Perry, and Aaron Abke provided explanations for the course material that made it accessible. The workbook section of the course, 365 daily lessons, each centered around a simple yet engaging affirmation. This became my entry point into the course. These concise statements offered both immediate insight and long-term contemplation. Some I could immediately connect with, like, I allow all things to be exactly as they are, and my heart beats with the peace of God. These resonated with the truth I seem to already know. Others, such as, forgiveness is my function as the light of the world, and all things are lessons God would have me learn, required patience. I had to sit with these deeper concepts, and over time, I began to understand their meaning and integrate them into my life. The course's affirmations gave me practical tools to address my lifelong struggle with overthinking. Almost like playing a game of whack-a-mole, when a negative thought pattern or emotion would arise, I would apply the truth statement that the course provided. When negative mental loops would begin, I could interrupt them with affirmations from the course. These statements not only displaced my negative thinking, but gradually reshaped my entire thought system and the way I perceived myself and the world around me. What I was discovering through experience was that thoughts you think over and over again eventually shift your perception. When we understand this process, we begin to see how practical tools like affirmations can address the misperceptions we identified earlier. The belief in separation, lack, external fulfillment, and need for control. I later discovered that these powerful statements function similarly to what Eastern traditions call Mahavekiyas, meaningful utterances or great sayings that, when heard or spoken at the right moment, can instantly evoke a shift in consciousness. In Hindu Vedanta, Mahavekiyas like, that thou art, are designed to trigger recognition of one's true nature. Similarly, certain A Course in Miracles affirmations seem to bypass my intellectual defenses and speak directly to a deeper part of me that recognized this truth. I experienced the transformative power of these teachings most deeply through forgiveness. After being betrayed by someone I trusted, I found myself in a situation that involved losing what I considered to be a substantial sum of money. It was a long, drawn-out, frustrating ordeal that caused me a great deal of suffering. The way I was trying to forgive wasn't working. I would tell myself, I forgive this person. I'm over it. I don't care. It doesn't matter. Yet, I knew this approach was failing because whenever I was reminded of this person or situation, I would immediately feel a surge of anger, resentment, and frustration. I wanted to be able to move through my day without worrying about something triggering the resentment I held within me. The Course taught me that what I truly am cannot be betrayed, diminished, or devalued by another's actions, because my true nature exists beyond form. Whenever feelings of grievance, resentment, or anger arose within me, I would meet them with Course affirmations like, I will not hurt myself again today. Let me not see myself as limited. God is the love in which I forgive. And love's eyes perceive all things as kindly and as good. Over time, something began to shift. The transformation wasn't immediate or linear, but gradually, Over time, something began to shift. The transformation wasn't immediate or linear, but gradually, the intense emotional charge began to dissolve. I knew that I had truly healed when I could encounter this person on social media or hear their name without experiencing that familiar surge of anger. What struck me most about this experience was how these simple A Course in Miracles affirmations provided a practical pathway through what had seemed an impossible emotional landscape, where intellectual understanding and forced positivity had failed. These statements, repeated with sincerity and presence, actually transformed my perception. This realization became the foundation upon which this book was built. The power of properly applied spiritual wisdom has always been about inner transformation rather than external change. These affirmations gradually realigned my perception with a deeper truth. Having experienced the effectiveness of the Course's affirmations, I initially wanted to create an affirmation index, a collection of these statements that others could use in their own healing process. I knew firsthand how transformative it could be to have positive thoughts readily available to replace the negative mental chatter so many of us experience. However, as I began compiling and categorizing affirmations, I realized I needed to provide context. Without understanding the Course's unique interpretations of concepts like God, forgiveness, and miracle, these statements could be easily misunderstood or dismissed altogether. I also recognized that effectively working with affirmations requires two additional components. First, you need meditation, a practice that helps you become aware of your thoughts and develops your ability to direct your attention. Without this awareness, affirmations become mere words rather than tools for transformation. Second, while affirmations can replace negative thoughts with positive ones, this approach has limitations. All thoughts arise from underlying beliefs, and unless you address these core beliefs, the same negative thoughts will continue to surface. This insight led me to explore belief correction, the process of identifying and transforming the beliefs that generate limiting thoughts. What began as a simple affirmation collection evolved into a comprehensive approach to mind healing through three interconnected practices. First, meditation, creating the space to observe thoughts rather than being consumed by them. This awareness is the foundation for all transformation. Second, belief correction, identifying and transforming the underlying beliefs that color our perception. Beliefs are simply thoughts we've repeated until they feel like truth, shaping how we interpret our experiences. Third, affirmations. Deliberate thoughts designed to redirect the mind towards truth, serving as anchors when old thinking patterns threaten to pull us back into limitation. In the coming sections, we'll explore each of these practices in depth. In Part 2, we will focus on meditation as the foundation for awareness. In Part 3, we will explore the process of belief correction, how to identify and transform limiting beliefs. Part 4 will present affirmations as tools for redirecting attention toward truth. The final section will explore how these practices naturally lead us to discover and live our deeper purpose. Before we begin, I'd like to make a disclaimer. This book doesn't claim to be the definitive answer or the only path. I believe there are as many paths to healing, peace, and happiness as there are people on the path. This is simply my collection of insights and practices that have transformed and helped me on my own journey through reducing my psychological suffering. Consider what follows as a practical guide to implementing the great perennial understanding.